This episode is brought to you by Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global media organization that makes the life-changing wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to all. Visit whereyou'refrom.org for more information. That's whereyafrom.org.
Welcome to episode 87 of the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum, and this week I sit down with Mike Savage. Mike was considered a criminal mastermind by federal authorities. After a 5-year investigation, he was sent to prison where he served 15 years, 2 months, and 28 days. Today, you will hear Mike talk about the sacrificial love of his wife, Cynthia. You will also hear how God used his prison time to wreck and save his life. This conversation is a profound example of how God is still at work in the world and in human hearts today. You can find the book titles Mike mentions, a link to a prisoner's perspective, and quotes from our time together at graceenoughpodcast.com/show notes. Now, on to episode 87 with Mike Savage, From Prison to Praise. Good morning, Mike. Thank you for being on the Grace Enough podcast.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
Go ahead, introduce yourself and your family, and tell all of our listeners what you're doing currently.
Well, my name is Mike Savage. I'm an adjunct professor. I teach psychology. I teach theology. I teach sociology, biblical studies, systematic theology. I have 2 doctorates. One's in psychology. The other is in theology. So I'm kind of a crossover guy, so I can teach general education courses like psychology and in a Christian environment, present it from a Christian perspective. So that's what I do right now. I'm married. My wife, Cynthia, is the director for 3 hospitals in Corpus Christi. She's the head of case management, if anyone knows what that is. It seems kind of be a little obscure to some folks, but she's in charge of that, has a bunch of people that work for her. We live in Corpus Christi on North Padre Island. We have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and 5 grandchildren, all of them grandsons.
Wow.
They live in California and are currently learning what poor air quality is all about and being ready to leave if fires show up, that sort of thing. But they're all grown adults, married, doing well. Here on Padre Island, I have 2 dogs that I am primary caregiver for. They are my other significant others rather than just my wife, Cosmo and Addison. So you may hear them at some point during the podcast. They like to make their presence known. So let's see, I've written a book, my memoir. I'm in the process of editing a book that I wrote. It's fiction.
Nice.
And I refer to it as kind of Christian because you never know these days who you might or might not offend, right? And that's pretty much been my life for the last 10 years. So there you are.
Yeah, let's jump into what we're going to talk about today and kind of set the stage with you sharing your story, just a little bit about your childhood and kind of work your way up through your first few jobs.
I was born in Florida and grew up in Central Florida in Orlando. My dad worked for the space program at Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy at the time. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom. She had a series of illnesses that the doctors could never quite put their finger on, but managed to give her medications nonetheless that, today we realize are addictive, but it was the 60s. And so, it was throw a pill at it. And so she had some issues with that. When the space program ended in 1969, my dad found a job in Colorado working for Coors Brewery.
What a change.
Yeah, exactly. So, from space program to being whatever he was doing there at Coors at that particular time. I played a lot of football in Florida and tried to carry that on into Colorado, but discovered early on that I had great enthusiasm but little talent. Just being a big guy wasn't the solution to everything. Still kept me trying and ended up with a couple of back surgeries and things from my lack of talent, but not for lack of trying. Went to high school in Lakewood, Colorado, graduated, and my first job was at a place called LaBelle's, which was a kind of like a precursor to a Costco, I guess, but it had a lot of electronics. So I was selling electronics. went to the University of Denver for a while and decided college wasn't for me. So I got into broadcasting. And
you have a great broadcasting voice. Like you really do.
Thanks. And a face for radio is what they told me after my first television job. It was, and I'm serious. I started out in North Platte, Nebraska as a news director. And I was offered a job in Goodland, Kansas at the world's smallest CBS TV affiliate. Now, who couldn't resist doing that? So I went down there as news director and was there for a few years. I'd married my high school sweetheart.
Okay.
And that was a wreck. That was a disaster. It didn't end well, but it ended. And this was all pre-salvation, pre any of this at all. I mean, my parents took me to a Baptist church in Orlando when I was a kid. I never really got it, went to the camps and did all the stuff, but it's kind of like, I want to play football and I'm not trying to hear about Jesus when I'm, 10, 11 years old. It just didn't click. It wasn't there.
Yeah.
So anyways, when we got to Colorado, didn't do much with church either. And so going out into the world, I didn't do anything with church or anything, and just, okay, whatever. And so I got a job in Goodland, Kansas as a news anchor also, and ended up after about 3 years thinking, I don't like Kansas. I really don't like TV that much and constantly being told what to wear. I was one of the guys that they would tell me what to wear, the suit, tie, but I'd only wear the top half of the suit. I had shorts on underneath because it was hot under the lights, right? And I'm wearing shorts and tennis shoes. Finally got a job in Napa, California.
Nice.
And moved to California. That's where Cynthia and I got married in 1989. I've lasted doing different jobs. I would fill in for people in San Francisco on occasion, do things like that. But I'm not the Mike Savage that everybody talks about. Right? I'd never even heard of him, to be honest with you, until here we go, audience, until I went to prison. Now, how did that happen, you ask? Well, interesting story there.
That's right. That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's what we want to talk about, I would imagine. But let me just explain to you that while I was in radio, you don't make a lot of money in radio back in the 80s. So this guest that I had suggested there were other ways to supplement my income. And I'm going to be deliberately vague here because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. I don't want to glorify my sin and I don't want to give anybody else any ideas. Suffice it to say that it involved money laundering. Mm-hmm. And a few years later, 5 years later, I was indicted on a 101 count federal indictment, 101 counts. And my life came crashing to a halt. I had left radio. I'd gotten full-time into doing that, hid it all from my family very successfully. And we can talk about that, but I hid it from them. And so it was a shock to everyone when the federal agents from the FBI, Organized Crime Task Force, Internal Revenue Service, Post Office, all that kind of stuff came rushing into the house one morning with a search warrant. Took my wife, Cynthia, who was, I think, 6 months pregnant with our youngest child at the time, away. Told me that she wouldn't be coming back until they interviewed me.
Wow.
Now, what they'd actually done is they'd taken her to breakfast, one of the female officers, but I had no idea what was going on.
But still, it's terrifying for her. You knew a lot more about what was going on than she did.
I knew everything that was going on and she knew nothing. And so we'd only been married a couple of years when that happened. And so it's an immediate fall from grace when you live in a small town and people know you. Napa was at that time a small town. The paper headlines, they had known this was going to happen. The government tipped them off. So that afternoon in the newspaper, all this stuff comes out. It was just horrific.
Yeah. And so at this point, you're how old and you have other children at home, correct?
Yeah, I was 26 when all this came down. And once it came down, you think an indictment, okay, all of a sudden you're off to jail, that's it. Well, they were investigating me for years before they actually did this, all right? And they grouped all these other people that were involved with me. They gathered them up and they were all going to be tried together. But that took a couple of years for that to play out before this indictment comes down. I'm actually arrested the night before our youngest son was going to be christened.
Oh, wow.
They came to the house, all the families there, all that kind of stuff, and took me away the night before. No idea that was going to happen. No idea whatsoever.
Did you know you were being investigated?
Sure. That's that. When they raided the house 2 years before, I knew I was under investigation, but that was the first time I knew.
Okay, so they came in and raided 2 years before, but then did not come and arrest you officially until the night before your youngest son, who your wife was pregnant with, when they actually questioned you for the first time.
That's correct, and that questioning didn't go well. You know, I kept asking where my wife was. They weren't going to answer me, and so at that point, I was confronted with, okay, fess up, admit it, or be a tough guy and fight it. And I made the poor decision of deciding to be the tough guy and fight it. So I fought it for 2 years. I mean, I went to trial. There was no pleading out. There was none of that. And while all this is happening, some people begin to sue us, different kind of court where, you know, the civil court, you don't have to, there's not the preponderance of the evidence. I mean, so we're getting sued. All our assets are frozen. All this stuff is happening over this 2 year period, and you're fighting a two-front war. I actually was praying, even though I hadn't been saved. I'm still praying. I'm saying, God, please get me out of this. Please get me out of this. And he did. He did get me out of it. I went to prison. I was found guilty. I think it was a day before my 30th birthday. I was 29th birthday. I was 33 when that happened. I'm trying to place all these numbers now because I've never really thought about that. Yeah, but it was before my birthday, and then the trial had gone on for about 3 months.
Okay.
Just sitting there day after day, being harassed, not harassed, but I mean, people telling the truth. I mean, I was feeling just totally despondent. Like I was numb. And my attorney, who was a public defender, because all our assets were gone, put on a 3-day defense.
Wow.
And I have these co-defendants who are blaming me. And the defense attorney asked me, says, hey, Mike, do you want to testify? I said, yeah, I'll testify. So I go over and testify. And the reason I did that is I thought that if the jury heard my side of things, it would make a difference. And
a difference for what, though? Because you knew at this point, like, I'm guilty. But you thought, like, maybe you might change their mind?
I might change their mind. That was my motivation. It was not this, even though it came across, I cleared my co-defendants. I said, no, this was me. I did those things. Yes, but here's why I did those things. Thinking, come clean on the stand, you know, co-defendants are acquitted. Yeah. I'm ultimately convicted on 89 of 90 counts. They had dropped some of the counts before trial. I'm convicted on 89 of 90 counts. And I'm still trying to figure out how I got off that one count. I did that too, but I'm convicted on 89 of 90 counts, ultimately sentenced to 17 and a half years in prison, which in federal prison, you do 85% of your time, not 50%. There's no anything, nothing. You do 85%. You can only do more time. You can't do less because it was what they called the new law at that time. There's no parole board. There was none of that. And so that's I did 15 years, 2 months and 28 days in federal prison.
Okay, so I have to ask you, and I know listeners want to know, Cynthia, your wife, stayed with you despite having absolutely no idea. So go back and tell me a little bit about what your family life was like while you were living this criminal lifestyle and she was clueless. And then what was it like those 2 years where you weren't in prison, but you were being investigated? Like, how was family life then once she knew?
You know, she tried to make it as normal as possible.
Really?
Yeah, she tried to just, you know, she was worried to death about me, worried about, you know, what was going to happen to me.
Did you tell her? Did you come clean and say, I did it?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't do that. Look, I wasn't a stand-up guy. Yeah, I want to make that clear. I did it. I was not a stand-up guy. I was a liar, and I was a criminal, and I admit that.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to say, well, he doesn't sound like he's, you know, taking responsibility. I take full responsibility. You know, so no, I never not one time did I ever come clean or anything like that. She was the model mom and wife during those 2 years. And that's hard for some people to believe. And I get that. I tried to divorce her 3 times when I was in prison.
Wow.
3 times. And I mean, the last time was by phone. I said, look, I'm not getting out of here till 2008. There's no way you're going to stay with me. And this is, 1995, 96. And I said, just not going to, there's no way. And she said, and I'll never forget this. She said, if you ever say that to me again, I will yank you through the phone and you will get 5 years for escape. Well, they record phone calls in prison. Okay. And they look for certain words, right? And the word escape popped up on their list. And I got called into the lieutenant's office and he'd listened to it. And he said, listen to me very carefully. And I'm not going to say the exact words because this is a Christian podcast that were used with me, if you understand what I'm saying. But he said to the effect that I was ignorant of what real love is all about. Then I was an idiot for acting the way I was acting with her. And that a couple of days in the hole would be good for me right now. And wow. So, yeah. So and I spent a lot of time in the hole, but the problem was it was after I became a Christian. It wasn't before. It was free reign. But once I became Christian, then all of a sudden, I started getting locked up for investigation, stuff like that. But Cynthia made everything normal as she possibly could. But constantly, there's that gorilla in the room of, anything could happen, jumping every time the doorbell would ring or there'd be a knock on the door or that sort of thing. But this is a remarkable woman, just a remarkable
obviously.
Woman.
And at this point, she wasn't a believer either?
She'd been raised Catholic.
Okay.
All right. She'd been raised Roman Catholic. So I imagine she was doing her, rosaries, and I'm sure that she was doing her prayers and that sort of thing, going to mass, doing all that. But let's leave that theology aside for just a second.
Absolutely.
Let's discuss it a little bit later, if that's right, because that's an important point. It is a very important point to me that we talk about that theology if we can. But just kind of getting through the deal, I was initially sent to the penitentiary in Lompoc, California. They discovered later that was a misclassification. I should have gone to the FCI, a lower level, because it was supposedly white collar. There's all this kind of stuff, right? There were guns and drugs, and so I got misdesignated, and eventually got moved over to the FCI, where I was there for a little over 6 years before I was transferred to Taft, California, and they put me in a camp. All right, they put me in a camp, and the camp was a prison for profit. The ones, I don't know if you've heard of those or not. They're run by private companies.
Oh, yes.
And they had just gotten the contract, had no clue what was going on, and the inmates were running the place when I showed up. And that's where I ended up doing the rest of my time. Eventually released to a halfway house in Oakland, California, in September of 2007, which was the worst place I'd ever been in my life, including the county jails where I'd been held and all these.
Really?
That was horrible. Oh, it had all kinds of mixtures of classifications. It was the Wild West at a halfway house. And so eventually I was put on home detention with a ankle monitor and worked my way off that in March of 2008. And so that was technically the end of my sentence, and then began 5 years of supervised release, after which I did 2 years. They let me off that.
And so as we begin to get into a little bit of just how you came to know Jesus, another question I have is this time, your 15 years in prison, was your wife coming and visiting frequently and bringing the kids, or, how did that work?
Okay. First of all, I know there's somebody wondering about this, and I'm going to just answer it. There are no conjugal visits in federal prison. Yeah. Okay, just to know, anybody contemplating a crime, don't do a federal crime, because there's no conjugal visits or anything like that. So you're, at any rate, she would visit me in Lompoc every other weekend and bring the kids. And that's a 6.5 hour drive each way from where she was living. So every other weekend.
She has young kids.
Well, 8, 9, we have children from previous marriage, So 8 and 9, and then Jesse, the youngest, was, growing up.
Yeah.
He's a young, toddler. Dad's in prison.
right.
Okay, we'll go visit dad. The others,
right.
it's kind of like, I don't know, type of thing. So they, but it was 6 hours. To Taft, it was 4 hours. But she would drive every other weekend, come down, stay, visit me on Saturday afternoon, Sunday, and then drive back and go to work on Monday.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really incredible. I mean, it really is. She has I'm assuming an incredible testimony.
But you wouldn't know it from her demeanor. It's like, how can I describe? I know you may find this hard to believe, but I'm kind of the wild, free spirit. I like to try new things. Let's do new things. New foods. I like when I'm cooking, I cook all this. And Cynthia is she's a nurse. She's a by the book person at work. And she fell in love. And obviously you can see me. It wasn't because of my stunning looks. She fell in love with me because God made that happen. And she never let loose. Not one time. Never like, okay, I'm going to think about this, or I'm going to, and it drove me insane when I was in prison. I knew I was being lied to. This couldn't be the case. This is impossible. How is this? She's beautiful. And I just am stunned, and I don't believe it. And I don't believe it until she goes through cancer 2 years before I get out.
Wow.
And pardon me?
What changed then that you really realized, like, she's enduring this and still sticking with me?
She told me that every time I thought that she was going to be unfaithful or leave me, that it hurt her. And that broke my heart. And if she'd said it years before, I don't know how I would have reacted. But as soon as I knew that I was hurting her by saying those words, it's like God said, okay, you get it? You get it? You get it? So, that was she went through some horrible things. After I got saved, I thought, oh, this is it. Okay, things are going to be good. They immediately told me I was called to be a pastor. So I'm thinking, cool, pastor. I have no idea what that is, but all right, then I have a goal. Start seminary and all this.
Who told you that?
One of the chaplains told me that. And he said, because the way I was with other inmates, so I would counsel and I would do these things and I could preach and teach and all that. Okay, all right. So I'm going to do this. So I start seminary while I'm in there. Well, Cynthia's paying for it, right? And there's a point in time where my parents got sick, both of them. And she, we talked about it. She and Jesse moved in. The first weekend that I call her on the phone, she says, your parents are crazy. And I said, well, yeah, look at me. What do you expect? They buy groceries before they pay bills. Did you realize that? Buy groceries and then they pay bills. And if the bills are late, the bills are late. And that was abhorrent to her. And I asked her, I said, because the Holy Spirit at that point kind of hammering me, getting me.
Yeah.
And follow up on this, follow up. I said, well, it's not like you've ever gone without food. You're paying for seminary. You send me money to put on the phone at work and all that, or phone at the prison, and I can call you and all that. And there's just a silence. And my heart is falling at this point into my stomach. I said, have you? And she explained that there were times when there wasn't enough money for the children to eat and for her to eat, and to send me the $20 a week that she used to send me and then pay for the seminary. So she went without food at times to do this, right?
Wow.
And I'm tearing up here. I do it every time.
Well, because it's a true picture of Jesus.
I flew off the handle at the chaplain, and I used prison language when I did it. As his chapel clerk, I go off. I said, why in the world would God do that to my wife? Why? I'm the one that did wrong. Punish me more. I'm already here. Punish me more. I don't care. But to do that, and the chaplain said just what you said. That's a perfect example of what Jesus did, isn't it? And I understood more about the gospel at that point.
Yeah, the grace of God is just truly indescribable.
Oh, it was, and he wasn't even mad that I was angry with him. It was one of those like, you're going to grow. You're a kid.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that was one of the pivotal moments in my walk with the Lord. that I suddenly realized that, this is a lot deeper than preaching, teaching. So essentially what it came down to was that Cynthia was God's way of showing me, this is how much I love you. You're having trouble comprehending anything past teaching and preaching and what are you going to do when you get out, all that. Here, let me show you what this is all about. And once it settled in, it changed the way I studied. It changed the way I approached seminary. It changed the way I lived and in prison, because it wasn't just a job. It wasn't just something, okay, in 7 or 8 years when I get out, none of that. It became one of those things where I actually had to think about relationship. And I began studying differently than I did before. And I started reading books that I never would have read before. The Practice of His Presence by Brother Lawrence being number 1 on my list. That's the way I pray today. I was walking the track, talking to him out loud. My neighbors can tell you there's times they think I'm talking to them. What would you say, Mike? Oh, never mind. Sorry. They think old man talking to himself. I'm talking to God and I'm listening. And so when I'm teaching about prayer, I say to my students, I want you to take 1 minute, close your eyes and think of nothing but God. And so they close their eyes for 1 minute. After 1 minute, I'll say, okay, how many of you actually were able to do that? And anybody who raises their hand, I say, liar, liar, liar. It's impossible to do unless you discipline yourself to be able to do that. And the best part of Brother Lawrence's book to me was not just the conversation with God, because that's how I pray now. I never say amen unless it's food, because I don't want the food to get cold. But the thing is, I never say amen. I'm not going to hang the phone up on him. And I got reported to an academic dean for telling him to not say amen at the end of their prayers. And I went in and explained to him, he goes, oh, that's great. Where'd you learn that? So I told him, but I mean, that was, and it's not like a dad, but I've done that.
Yeah.
And be praying and all of a sudden go, dude, that is incredible. I called God, dude. Oh no. So it was pretty remarkable beginning of a change that's been maintained, even through 2020, with the Hurricane Harvey when we were here, Hurricane Hannah this year, all that. It's like, we left our house the first time, whatever's left is left. That's fine. And the only thing that I took, Cynthia had everything, we're ready. Okay, let's go. I ran back in and picked up our wedding album, and because I wanted to make sure that didn't go anywhere. And I think she was going to cry. I said, you got to drive the other car. Don't start crying. Let's go. So that was the way, some of the changes that were made there. And I think that for me, once I understood that kind of relationship, rather than having to beg God for stuff, what kind of father makes a child beg for things? What is that? Begging? And the other thing about prayer is if I don't feel like praising him that day, if I'm having a bad day, I go and tell him that. I just can't right now. And he's never condemned me. And like Brother Lawrence, when I forget about him doing something, he does call you back. He's not like, oh, Holy Father, I forgot. Oh, no, Dad, come back here. We pick up where we left off. I mean, Brother Lawrence taught me so, and I never would have gotten to that point. The other one was Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards.
All right. I haven't read that one.
Changed my whole idea about leadership. And that'll break your heart when you do. That was I thought, strong leaders, pastors, I'm going to preach out, I'm going to do this. And there's people that do that and they do it successfully. That's great. But there's some of us that just aren't that way.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to bring my criminal mindset into ministry. I mean, that'd be kind of messed up. But instead, I learned humility. I learned about David. And then the other one was Prisoner in the Third Cell by Gene Edwards, which is about what happens when God doesn't live up to your expectations. And it's about John the Baptist. And each of those are like an hour read. I mean, come on. So I go through those 2-3 times a year just to brush up and remind myself about some of these things. So
it's crucial to have some books like that, though, in my opinion. I feel that way a lot about Screw Tape Letters. I could seriously read that one every few months just for the reminder that this spiritual warfare going on around us, it is real. And, there are just those little books like that are just so great because they can really help refocus your mind on truth and just the tenderness of God and his presence. So good.
I'm editing my novel right now. I wrote a novel, and the talk is, It's not probably Christian enough because this is a Christian novel. It's really not, but it's basic, down to earth type of relationship with God that this kid develops over time. And it's one of those things that I can see me in it. I can see if I was 13, it was about this 13-year-old kid. I get it now. I probably wouldn't have gone to prison, but I wouldn't have known the love of God. And I wouldn't have known how much my wife loved me had I not gone.
Wow. Well, and I want people to know, and I want to know, what led you to Jesus? What was that process in prison like? What were the experiences that finally broke your heart to say, I need you?
I was working as a chapel's clerk. I was a lead clerk in the chapel, unsaved. I got transferred from the kitchen where I was making illegal alcohol to sell it on the prison. I get transferred from there to the chapel, of all places, right? And I asked the chaplain, what's the deal? He says,
how many years in is this, real quick, if you remember?
2 years. 2 years.
Okay.
And so I get transferred to the chapel. I said, what is this? How am I going to make money here? And because it's the most scrutinized place in the prison, because volunteers come in. Well, there's 13 religious groups that were using the chapel at that time, the chapel area, from the Muslim groups, Jewish groups, Wiccans, all the different religious groups. So I'm learning about those, and I'm kind of examining each one, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the Muslim stuff. I mean, that's not quite for me. I looked at Wiccan and I said, oh, no. No. Native American stuff. I mean, I'm looking at Catholic. Cynthia, I'm Catholic. And so I'm looking at all, but the mass was in Spanish. My Spanish, the words that I know in Spanish, hardly ever said in mass. All right. So that was the stuff that I'd learned. So I'm just kind of pondering and all this, and I'm miserable because I'm not going to get out until 2008. I'm all this stuff. I'm a server at chapel, and I'm the last guy to leave every night because I make sure everything's clean and order, all that kind of stuff. And we're always having visitors come in, or I say visitors, or volunteers coming in to preach and say how great God is, and occasionally have somebody that'd been in prison for 2 or 3 years come in and say, it turned my life around, and I was going to do a double life sentence, but God, and I'm thinking, double life? I didn't kill anybody. Why don't you let me out? So I'm thinking all these things, right? And I'm down. I'm sure Cynthia's going to leave me. I'm just, just at the very bottom of depression. Okay. Wow. And I'm Irish. I know how to get depressed. Okay. It's in our DNA. I know how to be depressed. But I was down. I mean, not suicidal down, but I mean down. I mean, what am I going to do? And they always come in and say, okay, repeat this prayer. This is a sinner's prayer. And if you believe these things, then you're saved. And I'm mocking them. Yeah, every time, because it's always the same guys that were coming up to get saved again, because they were new volunteers, and it was just over and over, this repetitive stuff. And I was sitting in the back of the chapel listening to this guy, and he was from Calvary Chapel, very back. And I put my head down just as they're going to launch into the sinner's prayer thing, right? I put my head down and I said, look, I have nowhere to go until 2008. I have absolutely nothing left of any money. I have nothing. Criminal. So I'm going to say this sinner's prayer. All right. I'm going to say it. And I'm going to mean it to the very best of my ability. But you need to show me something. Okay. Dumb thing to say to God. Show me something. All right. Show me something. But I did. I'm praying. I go through the thing. I'm sorry for all my sins. I repent. I believe Jesus Christ died. All the stuff. And when he said amen, I started crying. And I had not planned to start crying. I'd planned to go find some Pruno, which is the alcohol stuff that I would, and drink, and either go to the hole or fall asleep blissfully numb. But I started crying. And everything that I'd heard about God, everything that I had to sit through all these things about God, not believing, suddenly made sense. It's suddenly, out of the blue, sovereign will of God, whatever you want to call it, that synapse in my brain fired. And I started crying. I mean, weeping. And I'm in prison. I'm not trying to let guys see me. Come on forward. Come on forward. No, I'm not going forward. I'm going to sit here and cry. I'm not going up there and make. And I stayed right there and cried. Guys cleaned up as best as I could. Everybody left. And the next day I walk into the chaplain's office and I said, hey, this happened. I believe. I knew this was going to happen. Because I've been praying for you. Of course it's going to happen. Come on. Great guy. I mean, absolutely a great chaplain.
Wow.
And it was no gradual dawning. It was just like, he made me cry. No one else could make me cry. Devil couldn't make me cry. The world stuff couldn't make me cry. I didn't cry through the trial. I didn't cry through any of that. But when I told him, you got to show me something, he did. And I have never said that to him again, because I don't like to cry. But it was one of those just remarkable events for me. And I don't think that everybody has to go through that. I don't think, the one thing for me is that, Jesus had 12 disciples, not just one. Mm-hmm. So while I think that there's only one way to God, that's through Jesus Christ, I think there's at least 12 different ways, because those were pretty different people and they argued a lot.
That's right.
So I think there's a lot of ways to get to God. Mine was through being broken in prison. And, that's when I said earlier about I would pray to God, please get me out of this. He did. Put me in prison and saved me. Showed me how much my wife loved me. I mean, it's what happened. So that's all I can really tell you about that.
Yeah. Well, and as you're now saved, you're getting to do a lot of different teaching and things like that in prison. And so you've shared a little bit about how you matured and some things that, took place while and throughout prison. But the time comes for you to get out. And that brings on a whole new set of challenges once you get used to being in the prison setting. And so what was that first year like? You get out of jail, you get to hug your wife.
I'd never had a cell phone.
Yeah.
I had never been on the internet. I'm a born again believer, yes, but I'm a 1980s guy coming out into 2007, and I hadn't had all the cultural things. I didn't know all this stuff, the music, the what the church was like. I know what the church was like in prison.
Right.
Where our joke was, and it was the corpus indictus, we just called the indicted body. You had to be indicted to be invited to our church, that type of thing. And we saw each other 24/7, and we ate together, and we would put each other in check once in a while. Somebody was acting up or doing something, but if somebody said, that brother's going to stab you in the back, they meant it literally, as opposed to figuratively. So it's a whole different environment. But I was used to something different. And so when I came out, I made a lot of mistakes in thinking what church was going to be like, and in working in a church. I had a lot of rough edges, and frankly, I think I still do, but I had some rough edges that I had this expectation that, you're going to be accepted. People are going to love you. And to a degree, that's true. But okay, once you're loved and accepted, what are they going to do with you? Here's a guy with a doctorate in theology and 3 master's degrees. It's been in prison for 15 years. He comes out and they want to check you on theology. Well, I know theology now because I've read Calvin, I've read Luther, I've read all of them, digested them, had time to read those things. I've read the other books. So I'm familiar with all kinds of theology, and none of it makes any difference to me except the gospel of Jesus Christ. I had boiled it down to, I'm good going anywhere as long as 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1 through 11, these are the things you must believe, Paul said, in order to be saved. I'm good with that. You think you're predestined, you believe in free. I don't care. Do whatever. I have no problems with that. Now, some people say that's too universalist, and I get that. That's fine. But people get saved through different stuff. Faith healers. People are still getting saved, even though we question motivations and all that, because there's a lot of ways to Jesus Christ. But there was no denomination in prison. All right?
Oh, yeah.
Every church has a denomination, even the non-denominational.
Yes.
And as long as somebody doesn't say we're going to do a reading from the book of Revelations, I'm okay, because it's Revelation. Right? Just anything else but that. That's a deal breaker for me. You say Revelations, that's a deal breaker. Other than that, I'm cool.
Well, and what I hear you almost saying is so often today, I mean, you're almost like upside down or the reverse of what people experience now. They know a lot of times how to be that quote unquote cultural Christian, but they know so little about theology and about the Word of God, which hopefully we're all on a process, but there's nothing that's harder than seeing somebody who says they've been a believer for like 15 years, but they're still like working through the elementary truths of God's word, right? Whereas you had all this theology worked out, but still wasn't quite sure how to put that into practice in culture.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I cut those people all kinds of slack, even as a teacher, because you got to live your life. You got to make a living. You got people you're responsible for, this, that. And I get it. That's where, Brother Lawrence is enormously helpful in explaining how you can. He said, I'd be cutting carrots and talking about God. I didn't have to go to Vespers at 4:00. Or I told the why would I have to go there? I'm talking to him all the time. No, just go do Vespers. Okay. So off he would go because he was Catholic. But the point being how you can be in touch with God all the time rather than these are the end times. You can see okay, maybe, but so what? We're saved. What's the deal? But they can't see it. And imagine this, Amber, also. You're sitting in a Bible study and the guy next to you did 15 years in prison, knows a lot of theology, knows how to communicate. What am I going to say? What can I ask this guy a question? And if they do ask the question to the guy who did 15 years in prison and he knows the answer and is remaining silent because he's kind of wanting to know the people before he says anything, I'm in that position at that point where it's like, I don't know. I have never had the experience of dealing with that, and so it was unique. And I do not pine for the church in prison or anything like that. I'm just explaining to folks who may not understand that there are people who don't fit in because they're not sure how to do it because they don't have the experience. And then there's people with the experience that generally are running the things. And if their theology goes wonky, one side or the other, do we bring it up or do we just let it go? Because if it doesn't affect the gospel of Jesus Christ, then, I got into an argument with a guy in prison that the Sabbath is on Saturday. He says, no, the Sabbath is on Sunday. And we almost came to blows over that.
Don't get me started on that kind of stuff.
A fist fight over that, and I'm thinking, oh man. And so it's, I get out, I'm kind of like, yeah. And so honestly, it's okay to have people like my wife and I in church, but what are you going to do with them?
Yeah.
Honestly, how do we benefit? Well, everybody has a ministry. Yeah. Well, my ministry is kind of a one-on-one type of thing with my students. I do some counseling for a few pastors that they can just vent on me because I'm a counselor. They can vent. But it's more one-on-one than standing in front of 10,000 people and saying God is great. And here's what happened. Buy my book. It's just that's not me.
Right.
That's not who God made me. And so I can walk around with my dogs in the backyard. I can scoop up their poop talking to God, realizing that, this is a relationship,
Well, and that's what I want to know. How do you feel like, and I hate to have you speak for her. I really do. I'm going to have to sit down with Cynthia too, but just, how did, as she watched you and then you came out and you began to teach and do these things, how did that really change her too and her faith journey? Because you said, save that a little bit. I want to come back around to that theology that she holds.
Praise God, she was raised Catholic. And the reason I say that is because she comes from 8 brothers and sisters. She has a twin brother. And they always say, are they identical? No, brother. I get that question too when I'm teaching in psychology about twins. Well, if there's different sex, can they be identical? No. Okay. No. Why? Chromosomes. We'll explain that later. But her theology was.
No, I question you.
You're probably going to take that out too. But
no, I probably won't.
Good for you. Good for you. Good choice. But the thing is, her faithfulness was taught from a Roman Catholic background of being faithful. Family's a big Italian family. And she was taught faithfulness. So both of us messed up one time around in our first marriages. We both acknowledge that, realize that wasn't deliberate, but it happens. People get divorced for different reasons. But the point is, when she married me, she said, that's it. It's for life, regardless. And she stuck with that. That was her mindset. And it's still her mindset to this day. I've never brought up divorce, would never think of doing that. But she's very faithful. I mean, she goes to work every day at this hospital. We had the COVID-19 going on. Yep. She's exposed, all this kind of stuff. I mean, she's faithful, consistent. She thinks linearly, where I think in patterns. I see patterns. That's why I can't balance a checkbook, but I can do linear and post-linear statistics. You follow what I'm saying? I can do statistics, but I can't balance a checkbook because math is voodoo to me. I don't understand. So two different mindsets, but her faithfulness was instilled early on, and her relationship with God was such that it was on a linear path. Then suddenly it's broadened as we see that is just one path. There are others in the Protestants, and we can look at these things and experience God differently. When I told her the story of the shepherd and the sheep and breaking his leg and that sort of thing, she actually burst into tears. And I've had people say, "Oh, that's not true." I don't care if it's true. The point of the matter is, this is what happened to me. He busted my leg and carried me around for 15 years, 2 months, and 28 days to save me. Exactly. Look, her faith is beyond mine. I mean, we've had financial issues, because I couldn't get a job when I got out. And they don't just accept you into teaching or doing stuff. So I'm working construction. I'm doing all these other things, and trying to do this. I've got a probation officer that's on me, wanting to make sure I'm not, out there, the new mafia king or something like that. I mean, he's just on me. And after 2 years, he says, "Yeah, you're good, go." And they took me off paper 3 years early. And I was able to vote. I can vote now, and it was like, oh.
Such a gift.
I was like, okay, this is great. But the deal is, through all of this, God has had this plan and has moved it forward to where when our youngest son graduated from college, became a police officer, Cynthia and I never really liked California. Okay, it was one of those, it wasn't our lifestyle. So she got her master's degree, and she began looking around, and we're trying to pick places, where do you want us to go, God? What do you want us to do? And he didn't say anything. And then finally it came up one day that Corpus Christi came up, and Padre Island. And now Corpus Christi means what? Body of Christ in Latin.
Yeah.
Padre Island means what? Father's Island.
I was like, wait a minute. I don't know. I should know that.
I know it because we lived here and we went through it. But I mean, it was like, would you like it spelled out a little more for you where I want you to go? And they hired her instantly. I mean, so here we are. I teach online. Sometimes I'll go into the classroom. Sometimes, just see how it goes. But teach online. I'm teaching biology of all things right now, because at a Christian school, because they want it from a Christian perspective. So. And then, so that's what I do, and I'm open to do other things, as God opens the door. But that's how our life has been moved forward to make things happen. We had some rough patches at the beginning, as I'm trying to learn family again.
Yeah,
I'm gonna tell you one story. This kind of gives you an idea. I get home. First night home is a little before Thanksgiving, right? And so for Thanksgiving, everybody comes over to the house for Thanksgiving, right? And at around 10 o'clock, I'm ready for bed. I'm tired. So I go to bed. Because in prison, you don't say goodnight to everybody, right? Before you go to bed.
I already know you're...
So I go to bed. I'd only been home a couple of days. Next morning, Cynthia says, are you mad?
No.
I'm home. What, are you nuts? I'm happy. This is great. I love it there. She said, well, you went to bed last night. Well, I was tired. It was a big day and all that. And she goes, we didn't say goodnight to anyone. I said, say goodnight? What are you talking about? And I'm serious. That's exactly what I said.
It's little things. You don't think about that.
What are you talking? So I have to go out, and I'm just thinking, oh, man. So I go out and say, hey, good morning. Good morning. And everybody's kind of looking at me like, what's the matter with the old man? Did he snap or something like that? I said, okay, let me tell everybody something. We don't say goodnight in prison. All right. We just go to bed. All right. You don't night, none of that kind of stuff. You just go to, so I said, I have learned my lesson. I apologize. We'll go with that. So that was my indoctrination into that. Yeah. And if you want to hear, can I give you one more story?
Sure. I love it.
I'm trying to get to know my youngest son, Jesse, who's a teenager when I get home, right? And you know how teenagers are. They know everything. And so we're talking, but we're bonding over football. All right. He likes the Kansas City Chiefs. I like the Denver Broncos. You know, we're talking back and forth, doing all this stuff, going to the grocery store. And Cynthia's smiling because we're having good banter and all this kind of stuff. And so we get out of the car and are walking through the parking lot. And this lady makes a beeline to Cynthia to ask her if she's registered to vote. And, you know, beeline, right? Are you registered to vote? Cynthia goes, yes, thank you. Walks by, steps in front of me, and I walk around her and still talking to Jesse. And she runs back around to get in front of me. And, hey, are you registered to vote? I just kind of look at her. And I walk around her again. And Jesse's following. Lady, third time, gets in my face. And now I've been out of prison that long, right? But I'm home.
Yeah.
I look her in the eye. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you the exact words, but I explained to her, I just got out of prison. I'm on supervised release. I'm not allowed to vote, but I used other words. My prison words is what Cynthia calls them. I use my prison words. And my son, that's probably what helped us begin our bonding process, was me talking to this lady like this, right? Because he likes having a tough old man, right? And her eyes get huge and she leaves, right? And Cynthia pulls her hood up and walks into the grocery store while Jesse and I continue walking along. And I said, what's the matter? What happened? You okay? What I bought was one out of my wife. So she says, you've just announced to everyone within hearing range, because I talk loudly on that there's a convicted felon that's walking around, and they don't know what you've been convicted of. So they might think all kinds of things about you. And so that was another cultural thing that I had to learn, is be nice to people that you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the tough guy. Be nice. And
yes.
So that was even after being saved and doing high seminary, all this kind of stuff. And I just reverted to because in the 80s, you didn't do that to somebody. You kept away.
Right.
Especially if somebody looks like me.
Face.
Well, I'm a big guy too, and I was kind of like, ugh. So these things I had to learn moving along. And when pastors, they'll ask, what's the biggest thing that you've noticed that's changed in culture, and all that. I said, the coffee's a lot better. That was my answer. When they're expecting a religious answer, I'm telling you, coffee's way better than it was in the 80s.
Amen.
It's way better. So those are two kind of ideas of how to get back in. And I've had to learn about that.
Well, and the good thing about that voter story, though, is that lady somewhere, she is still telling that same story, Mike, all the time, about the time the convicted felon dude got up in my face.
Yeah, I'd like to think it may have caused her to commit her life to Christ, perhaps.
You never know.
You just never know. That's right.
You don't ever know. Could have at least been the stepping stone, right?
I think on that now and I laugh, but I was really just being, who I was, and as a Christian.
Well, it's like if you move to a new culture. I mean, if you left America and moved to a whole new culture, you have to learn different things in order to appropriate yourself. I mean, that's just part of it, no matter where you're at. And so a prison culture, it is a whole culture in and of itself. And so that could be a whole different podcast. But as we begin to close up here a little bit, you and Cynthia host a podcast, correct?
Well, we have, yes. And it's called A Savage Perspective. And we're trying to get back into it, but life happened. A hurricane happened.
Yes.
Also, we've discovered as you age, certain parts need to be fixed or replaced. And so we've gone through a couple of those with Cynthia, and now this COVID thing. So, I mean, and honestly, with my podcast, our podcast, I should say, we only put people on that we're interested in. We don't just, we're not trying to make money from it or do anything like that. So I'm genuinely interested in people that no one else may care. But, and Cynthia lets me book the show, and I never tell her ahead of time anything about the person. And, she didn't like it the first time, but then I explained to her, I said, that's because you'll be like the listener asking the questions a listener would ask. And I'll sound like the smart one for a change. So it works out pretty well, but we're starting up again next month, God willing, unless more parts need to be replaced on one of us. But other than that, I think it's going to be good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. And I love that. It really is just a testament to the grace of God. He'll use any story.
Yeah, I will. I mean, when I was writing the memoir, I'm looking at it and I'm crying in spots, and other spots I'm laughing, thinking what an idiot I was, and that sort of thing. And that was an eye-opening. I think that was cathartic for me as well, because everybody had said, you need to write a memoir. Right. And I said, yeah.
Help you process through it.
Nobody cares about that. What are you talking about? And I'm asking God, and God said, yeah, I want you to write the memoir. And I said, well, I'm busy, dude. I mean, I'm busy. I got things going on. I'm working. I got stuff around the house. I said, you're going to have to give me some time. 2 weeks later, Hurricane Harvey hits. And I have to spend the next 4 months helping, rebuild the house. But I have time to write the memoir.
Yeah.
So now whenever he suggests writing anything, I'm right on it. When he sends hurricanes, I said, look, I'll do whatever you want. You don't have to make more hurricanes. But it was hilarious how that worked out. It wasn't hilarious at the time, but it was, you see it.
Well, and share the name of the memoir if anyone would love to go and read it, purchase it.
It's called Prisoner's Perspective, The Redemption of a Criminal Mastermind. And let me just explain, that's an ironic title. Back in the 80s, anybody who was doing anything that had people working for him was classified as a criminal mastermind. The guys on the street that was slinging dope, if he had 2 people working, he's a criminal mastermind of that corner. But that's what the federal government called everyone at that time. So that it's an ironic title. I'm not claiming to be a criminal mastermind.
Other people called you that, right?
Well, the federal government did. And we know they don't lie, right?
Exactly.
I don't know your audience, if you could have seen the look on her face when I said that, she's like, how much can I say? Don't say it as me.
No, listen, my audience knows that I can be pretty sarcastic myself at times. So you're in good company. But Mike, I am going to close out with just saying thank you for being here today. I am very, very grateful.
I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, friends, if you're struggling with whether God is at work in the world, I hope after listening to today's episode that you have no doubt that He is still living and active and working in the hearts of people all around the world. If you want to check out Mike's book or refer to the resources that he mentioned today, don't forget you can visit graceenoughpodcast.com/show notes for all of the links and for quotes from today's episode.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough Podcast. Tune in next time.